All of you. Great to see you all again. All right, I saw two questions on the group. One was with respect to some confusion that got created regarding drain of wealth. Keep it in mind, the drain of wealth started in India from 1800 itself, around 1790s itself, with the Permanent Settlement Act. What I was saying yesterday was that drain of wealth, in terms of financial drain of wealth, all right, what we were discussing yesterday was drain of wealth in terms of financial drain of wealth that started in India from 1900 to 1947. All right, so drain of wealth was 1790s onwards, but financial drain of wealth is what I was telling you, because if you recall the context, I was talking in the context of service sector led growth. So in that context, the financial drain of wealth was being talked, which was 1900 to 1947. All right, that is one thing I needed to clarify. Second was, I will be giving you questions. Those questions I will be giving you on weekends. As in Friday, I will give you a question. In this week, of course, on Saturday, I will give you a question. Those questions, two questions I give you by the end of every week. And those questions, I will be giving you an answer to those in the next week. All right, so I give you 3-4 days to think over those questions, and those questions will be gradually built up on what I have taught you. All right, so जो भी मैंने आपको पढ़ाया, it will be built on those topics, and I'll give you those questions to make you practice answer writing a little. But remember, it's a little premature right now that you would look for immediate answer writing. All right, you need to know your text and know your things, and then you can go for some answer writing. Now, in today's session, what we will try doing, and gradually we will build up on those things. As you recall, we were talking about the trends of GDP and so on. So in today's session, what we will try doing is we will try covering the time period 1951 to 1966. And then if we are permitted, then hopefully we are, then we will take it further into 1966 to 1980. All right, India's post-independence part, I have divided it into things like this. 1951 to 1966, we call it the initial growth phase. In certain books, it's also called the Nehruvian phase, in the name of the first Prime Minister. So this is first phase we will talk about, and I will tell you, give me a second, and I'll tell you how I have designed things. And 1966 to 1980, this was a phase of structural retrogression, where some of the gains that we had made, we lost on those gains also. And 1980 to 1990 is the time period which we call economic revival. Revival of economy. So till period before 1991, this is what we will try going into. Then of course 1991 was economic crisis, and then the reforms after the crisis. So 1991 was economic crisis, and then of course the reforms after the crisis. So economic crisis followed by economic reforms. Now we will one by one go into it. This economic reforms part, I will not go into that. ये discussion अभी नहीं करेंगे हम लोग. ये discussion करेंगे end में जाकर, जब मैं आपको सिखा रहा हूँगा India after 91. Right now we will be interested in doing things till 51 to 91. All right. Another thing is that when we talk about the talks on, say this time period, I'll tell you how I have decided we will discuss it. So we'll discuss them under various headings. So we will first talk about trends of GDP growth, and per capita GDP growth. This is one thing we will talk about. Trends of, अच्छा मैं भूल गया था. Thank you Ashwin. इसको वहाँ रख दो please. Trends of GDP growth and per capita GDP growth. All right, that is one thing that we will talk about. Then we will also talk about, in this only, trends of industrial growth industrial growth, and in the industrial growth we will talk about capital goods industry and consumer goods industry. आजकल यूपीएससी थोड़े ज़्यादा demanding हो गए हैं, पहले शरीफ थे. I'll tell you why I say they have become more demanding, because 2 years back they asked a question which said analyze the trend of growth rate of capital goods and consumer goods industry in India. Now that was never asked till then, so then that means that they can ask you even to bifurcate between consumer goods and capital goods. So even that becomes a possibility. So in case by chance they ask you this question, so we will cover for that. And this we will do for all of these time periods individually. मैं मान सकता हूँ कि अगर मैं individually हर time period की ये trends discuss कर लूँगा और question आपसे इन trends पे सभी time period के आ गए, तो आप मिला के लिख सकते हो. I'm repeating myself in English. I'm assuming that if we discuss the trends of all these time period for all these things, then by chance they tell you talk about the GDP growth trend for the period 51 to 91. You will be able to definitely cover that up. So that is the way, because you know it had to be done one way. Either we do 51 to 91 together, but that won't make sense because there are different time periods in India's economic history. Also, we will also be covering savings and investment trends. Savings and investment trends in this time period. You know, savings and investment trends in this time period. So these three trends, trends of GDP growth and per capita GDP growth, trends of industrial growth, and savings and investment trends. These three things we will try covering upon. Now see, okay, I see one of your friends asking, good afternoon all of you joining me online. One of the friends asking you electricity distribution, electricity sector entirely is manufacturing. Don't go into anything else, Aditya. All right. But not manufacturing, I'm sorry, but industry. All right, now coming back to this, and there is one more thing that I would suggest we can always go by, that both online and offline, but mainly online, if ever you have a doubt in the middle of the class, I'm mainly talking to online people at the moment, if ever you have a doubt in the middle of the class regarding anything that was taught in the previous class, etc., then rather than writing it on the chat box, because you know I cannot digress and answer it always, so it's better that you send me a telegram message. कहीं तो type करना ही है तुम्हें, telegram पे type कर दो. You know, you got to type it anywhere, so type it at the right place. Send me a telegram message. After the class, I always see all the messages, and just for letting you know, I see each and every message on each and every group that I have created. Later on, don't tell me sir was eavesdropping. All right, but I do see that each and every message on each and every group that I have, I every day see it. You know, all your messages that you were exchanging yesterday, I do go through them. All right, so everything across, and I liked it because some of you I saw immediately that you guys were helping each other. You were helping each other with notes. Somebody asked also that हर दिन question नहीं मिलेंगे क्या? किसी ने जवाब भी दिया उन्हें कि अभी पहले ही तो क्लास हुई है. You know, so I do go through that. I am a busy running person at times, but I'm not that busy that I won't see what my students are writing or doing. You know, so I do keep a check. Don't worry at all. तो मुझे टैग जैसे कभी कभी यहाँ देखता हूँ @VJ1976, what will be the answer to this? Well, even if you don't do @VJ1976, VJ1976 sees it. You know, so don't worry about me not seeing it. That won't happen. Don't worry about it at all. I can convince you on that. You know, I can do that. But still, in case in the middle of the class there is a doubt, like say today I'm talking to you and I'll talk to you on this time period, mainly on these trends starting here. So it's possible that from yesterday there might be some doubt here or there. You can always ask me. I'm also expecting that in all this discussion, when I'm doing it with you, in the meantime, those of you who don't come from an economics background are surely covering up on your NCERT also. In case you have any problem in NCERT, you can always ask me or Sandeep sir. Lokesh sir will be here from tomorrow. So you can always ask any of us and we can clarify it. But do read it, it's important. Alright, आप अपने NCERT ज़रूर पढ़ोगे. All of you will read NCERT. Again I repeat, if you are not from the background, if you are from the background, you don't need an NCERT surely. All right, but do make sure you have read it. I'll tell you why. There are some basic concepts in it which I cannot go into details in the classroom. One more thing that reminds me, few discussions on national income I will do with you. I will be spending almost say 2 hours discussing few things on national income with you, because national income is something where few concepts come in, and it is there in the syllabus of IES, plus it will help you in understanding my economic discussions better. So few discussions on national income I will do, but that discussion I do when I am teaching you macro. All right, so before macro, I introduce national income, and then I talk to you on basic macroeconomics. All right, now let us see this. So we begin with the first things first. We will begin with this time period, the initial growth phase, and we will begin with trends of GDP growth and per capita GDP growth. Now, you know, when they ask you a question on trends of GDP growth, trends of per capita GDP growth, they are actually asking you a question related to, or asking you to explain those trends. मतलब ये नहीं करना होता कि डेटा दे दिया उनको और बोले अब तुम समझ लो क्या हुआ था. You have to explain to them, giving them the data, that what exactly happened, how exactly it went. All right, so that is what we will try doing. We will first look into the data on 51 to 66 and then take it thereafter. So we will try going in that direction. Let us see this then. So you give a heading, and one more thing. Yesterday what I taught you is a thing which will remain in continuation. I am not yet over with that. Yesterday I began teaching you what was India's occupational structure and what was India's income structure in 1951. All right, that is all that was doing. And then I was explaining to you why few features we see in it and why we see that. For example, why was agriculture dominant? Why was service employing more people than manufacturing? Why was service sector growth higher than manufacturing? So in the discussion we were doing yesterday, I was telling you only about 1951. Gradually, I will teach you about the trend also in India's economic structure. Like what was the situation in 51? You saw that yesterday. Then what was the situation in 71? And what was the situation in 91? So we will take these three reference periods, 51, 71 and 91, and analyze how did India's occupational structure and how did India's income structure evolve or change in this 3 time period. Do I believe I'm clear on that? Few questions that I was giving you yesterday, few discussions, जो एक वो भी सवाल था आप में से एक का कि सर क्या क्वेश्चन कह रहे थे. मैं फिर से बता देता हूं कि मैं क्या क्वेश्चन कह रहा था. The question I was saying was, in case they ask you a question on only a comparison between services sector and industrial sector, that why services sector was dominant over industrial sector in India in 1951. So I was giving you some answers to those on why service sector was dominant, and 2 parts of that answer we were seeing. One part of the answer was, 2 parts we were seeing. One part of the answer was when we were talking about why employment was dominated. Another was why income structure was dominated by services sector. You combine the 2, and even if they ask you a 20-mark question, you will get around 250 words for that. Remember that another thing, that is again my job and I'll do it, but another thing I need you to keep in mind is that gradually it will be about 10 mark, 15 mark, 20 mark, and that will mean 100 words, 200 words approximately. Like for 10 mark they want 150 words, and for 15 marks they will need around 200 words, 225 words, and for 20 marks they're looking for not more than 300 words. So gradually our practice has to go that side. That how do I create my best 100 words, 250 words, 225 words, 300 words. Now nobody says it has to be a hard and fast 100, 225, 300, but it can't be more than 20 plus 20 minus 20. Can't be more than different than that. उसका एक कारण है. कारण ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि अलाउड नहीं. तुम लिखो 450 वर्ड लिखो, छोटी छोटी हैंडराइटिंग ऐसे करके लिखना, retrogression. Problem is how will you write it? End of the day, always remember, you will have to write 28 answers. 19 answers. 5 questions compulsory. Again 5 questions compulsory, question 1 and question 5. And then 3 questions you will have to choose, where there will be 3 parts each. Which will mean 5, 5, 3 into 3. So 19 questions you have to answer in 3 hours. So assuming you will take some time to think and reproduce your answers, one cannot expect you to write anything more than 3,000, 3,500 words in those 3 hours. कि तुम्हें सोच के लिखना होता है, तो 3,500 words का आप plan करोगे उन 3 hours में. That all right, I'll write on an average 18 to 20 words per minute. And that will be a very fast pace that you are writing at. But if you are writing 3,500 words for 250 marks, you can easily realize how many words you can give for each marks. You understand that? So that is the only thing I'm trying to highlight to you. That for a 10 marker, 150 is the limit. In any case, they mention it for you. Similarly, for 15 markers, 225, 230 words is the limit. So initially, you can take your liberty. Initially, you can write longer and write bad. There is no problem with that. अगर मैं तुम्हें कोई homework दूँ, तुम खराब आंसर लिखो, मुझे उससे कोई आपत्ति नहीं है. तुम बिल्कुल ही खराब आंसर लिख के दिखा सकते हो. मैं तुम्हें बता दूंगा तुमने ये बिल्कुल ही खराब आंसर लिखा है. You know, और तुम्हें भी उससे कोई आपत्ति नहीं होनी चाहिए. If I tell you sometimes, if I criticize your answer, don't take that criticism that sir is criticizing me. No, I am only criticizing your answer, and I don't criticize scathingly. I am not cheap. I don't, behave in that manner where I will insult you. I don't do that. But it's my job to tell you where are you going wrong. There is no fun that I keep telling you a wonderful answer, great answer, and suddenly then one day in the mains exam you land up with 20%. So I will give you a feedback where I will tell you that, okay, these are the problems and this is what you could have improved. But in the beginning, there will be mistakes that you will do. But do those mistakes, gradually you will learn how to write better. All right, sometimes your answers can be completely haywire. I'm okay with that also. Let's come back now then to this, that we begin with 51 to 66, the initial growth phase, and we will begin with trends of GDP growth and per capita GDP growth. So we will talk about trends of GDP growth and per capita GDP growth in this time period. Planning I will teach you separately, so I am not discussing 5-year plans development in India at the moment. All right, we will have a completely separate discussion on what kind of planning we did till 1991, and then what kind of planning we did from 91 to 2012. Why did we drop doing planning? So all those discussions on centralized planning, decentralized planning, indicative planning, that is a separate class altogether. So that is why I am not discussing with you planning and all. Right now, we are only focused on talking about the trends, all right, the trends in GDP that were happening. Now, let us see this. When we talk on this 51 to 66 initial growth phase, the first part, and again I repeat, I'm discussing with you GDP trend and per capita income trend. And we will go into reasons of what happened and where did we go right, where did we go wrong. So if we take the first phase, 1951 to 1956, in this phase, GDP growth rate was 4.2% per annum. Now, you can find slight differences in different sources. Those differences are because some sources use GDP at factor cost for the trend part. Some sources use GDP at market price. The source that I am using is the GDP at market price, the trend numbers that government has given us in the latest economic survey. All right, so that is the source I'm doing, the new GDP series. But sometimes certain books will use GDP at factor cost, and certain books can sometimes also use the old series of 2004-5. See, there are various things. We have old series of 2004-5. Now we have an old series of 2011-12, and we have a new series of 2011-12. Our focus will be the new series of 2011-12. All right, our focus will be that. But sometimes you can see the old series numbers. Don't get bothered. At the moment, I have seen quite some flexibility in the examiners. They don't deduct your marks. All right, अगर तुम old series के numbers भी लिख देते हो, तुम्हारे number नहीं cut करते वो. But I hope that with the discussion in the class, you will be able to write the numbers anyways. Now, so 4.2% was the GDP growth rate, and in this time period, we don't have the population data for 51 to 56. We have the population data for 51 to 61, as in the census data that we have. But we have the NSSO data on population from 51 to 56. So for these kind of discussions, I will be using the NSSO data. I will keep telling you the source of data. 2-3 things in paper 2 helps us. One, quoting the source wherever possible. You can just put a bracket and write this is the source, but only if you have time. Second, using the name of economists who were prominently working or writing on certain theories in particular time period. All right, those things will definitely help you in that in these places. And so GDP growth rate 4.2% per annum, and population growth, the NSSO numbers that suggest was 2.2% per annum. So per capita income growth was 2% per annum in this time period. This time period, of course, coincides also with our first 5-year plan. You know, this time period coincides also with our first 5-year plan. So we had the GDP growth rate at 4.2% per annum, population growth at 2.2% per annum, and per capita income growth, therefore the subtraction between the two, 2% per annum. All right. Now, along with this, what were the reasons that this was happening in this time period? What was the reason that we grew in this manner? So there were particular reasons for GDP growth. I'll take you into that. There were particular reasons for population growth in a manner, 2-3 reasons. And that will, if you combine the reasons of GDP growth and population growth, you combine the per capita income growth reason there. All right, so that is how we will build upon. And when I do a time period, say 51 to 56, 56 to 61, so 51 to 66, if they ask a question, combine all that. Sometimes you may be running short of words when they ask you 51 to 91. I'm running with multiple words if they ask you 51 to 91. There my suggestion is mention all your points, you know, rather than explaining them in detail necessarily. But these days what I have seen in the optional paper is they are becoming quite pinpointed, that they will ask you a particular space and then expect you to write an answer to that. All right, so let us see this. We build upon that. You write below that GDP growth above GDP growth above 4% was almost double of planned growth in this time period. In this time period, you know, the 5-year plan had planned a growth of 2.1%. GDP growth was almost double of that compared to what was being planned. In the same thing you write, this was due to following reasons. You write in that. And now, when I will give you the reasons, remain careful, when I will give you the reasons, I will keep along with that telling you the basic things happening in this time period, like what was agriculture doing, what was industry doing, what kind of sectors were growing more. So in case they ask you a question specifically on industrial growth, then use those points to write on industrial growth. I hope I'm reaching you on that. Like say when I will make you write that industry was growing at 5.8% per annum and capital goods industry was growing at 8.7% per annum. So keep that in mind, that all right, In case they ask me about only industrial growth, then these are the points I will build upon. All right? Because remember, if they ask you only about industrial growth, they will never ask you only 51 to 66. Then they will say define industrial growth process in India from 51 to 91. And then you will have enough points to put it over there. All right? So you take that up, you write. मैं समझाना क्या चाह रहा था आपको बताता हूँ, क्योंकि नहीं तो बाद में ना कभी कभी तो एक साल बाद आप तब मुझसे मैसेज पे पूछते हो कि सर हमने इंडस्ट्रियल ग्रोथ ट्रेंड्स कहाँ किए। तो मैं वही आपको बता रहा था कि इंडस्ट्रियल ग्रोथ ट्रेंड्स भी मैं इसके साथ करता जाता हूँ, जिसमें मैं आपको जब रीजंस बताऊंगा कि कौन सी इंडस्ट्री कितना ग्रो कर रही थी, वो रीजन है जीडीपी ग्रोथ का भी, बट वही इंडस्ट्रियल ग्रोथ ट्रेंड भी बताता जाता है हमें। ऑलराइट, सो व्हेन आई एम टेलिंग यू अबाउट रीजंस फॉर जीडीपी ग्रोथ, remain conscious of the reasons. Those reasons will tell you also the industrial trends and agricultural trends. So those trends will start getting covered in that manner. All right. Let's see this then. So you write A, industrial growth. Industrial growth in this time period, industrial growth in this time period was at 5.6% per annum, at 5.6% per annum, comma, mainly backed by growth in capital goods industry, growth in capital goods industry, comma, which was growing at more than 7% per annum. और याद रखने में आसानी हो, so that it becomes easier for you to remember, one trick you can use is wherever you are writing the data, just keep underlining that. So that data becomes the highlighted part. All right, that industrial growth at above 5%, we highlight that. Capital goods industry growth at above 7%, we highlight that. All right, that kind of a thing. In the same thing you write, after a full stop, intermediate goods industry, showed growth rate at 4.5% per annum, and consumer goods industry was growing, at less than 3% per annum. Full stop. Comparatively lesser growth of consumer goods industry I repeat myself, comparatively lesser growth of consumers good industry was due to relatively higher base effect We have a chair here, come. इतने स्टूडेंट्स में लूंगा ही नहीं कि बैठने की जगह ना मिले तुम्हें. Come along. I hope we can create a space here. All right. Due to higher base effect, you wrote that? I'll tell you what I mean by this last line. Please understand that. I'll tell you what I mean by this last line. So, you know, it comes like this. Britishers had, we discussed it yesterday in quite some number. So Britishers had developed consumer goods industry or let consumer goods industry develop in India. Capital goods industry had not been developed. तो जो चीज कंपैरेटिवली ज्यादा होगी, अगर उसमें ग्रोथ होगा भी तो उसका परसेंटेज टर्म छोटा दिखता है, एंड दैट इज कॉल्ड द हाई बेस इफेक्ट. इफ समथिंग इज अवेलेबल from earlier time period, even though it was growing, and it might have been growing, it was in fact in value terms growing quite good, but because it was present from earlier days, due to that high base effect, the overall growth rate in percentage terms looked lesser. Am I reaching you on this? I'll give you an example. Suppose, and ये सत्य घटनाओं पे आधारित नहीं है, right? The example that I'm giving you is a fabricated example, but suppose if you have consumer goods industry, if there is consumer goods which is equal to 100 rupees worth, and if I have capital goods which are worth 10 rupees. Now, if you add 10 rupees worth of extra consumer goods in this time period, this will become 110 and your growth rate will look 10%. But if you add extra capital goods worth 10 rupees in this time period, this will become 20 and the growth will look 100%. आपने add same ही किया. But why does this growth look more? Because the base on which you calculated growth was relatively smaller. The base on which you calculated growth here was relatively higher. Now go back to yesterday's class. I taught you that India had a dominance of consumer goods, consumer goods industry, and there was missing capital goods. So that is why when we started developing, since we had a missing capital good, any growth in capital good in percentage term was looking relatively more. But for consumer goods, it was looking relatively less. What I'm trying to explain to you is that low rate of growth in consumer goods did not mean less availability of consumer goods in those days. कंज्यूमर गुड्स के लो रेट ऑफ ग्रोथ का मतलब ये नहीं था कि हमारी अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ कंज्यूमर गुड्स कम हो रही थी. Consumer goods were there, but they were growing on a higher base, and therefore in percentage term it looked relatively smaller. I can believe we are clear on that? Because remember, one of the big factors happening in this time period was that consumption demand was rising in India. Between 1951 to 56, in fact, between 1951 to 66, this can be said, that consumption demand kept rising in India. I can believe my classroom understands that demand can be consumption demand, investment demand, government expenditure demand, and net exports. जो भी लोग नहीं जानते हो वो अब जान लो. All right, in case you didn't, that whenever you talk about aggregate expenditure in any economy, you know, aggregate expenditure in any economy, it will be consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure, and net exports. All right, that is the aggregate expenditure in any economy. Households will consume, households and firms can invest, government can spend on consumption as well as investment. Then foreigners can buy my commodities, which we will call exports. And if we buy foreign commodities, we remove it because those goods and services are not produced in my country. So that is export minus import, and we call it net export. Now this is the consumption demand part of it. All right. Now in 1951 to 56 time period, and I will make you write that as one of the explanations, but 1951 to 56 time period, consumption demand was picking up big time in India. All right, because now restrictions like Swadeshi, boycott, they were gone. 1947 के पहले problem क्या थी? कुछ लोगों के जेब में पैसे थे भी, तो भी वो नहीं खरीदते थे, because at times they could be participating in Swadeshi movement. pre-1947, even if people had money in their pocket, many times they did not participate, many did not purchase because they were participating in the boycott movement, Swadeshi movement. And so many times the British government was putting restrictions on Indians to consume goods and services. So even that happened in many circumstances. So that is why it is important to keep in mind. That is why it is important to keep in mind that when we talk about this time period in India, consumption demand was all rising, but consumer goods industry still showed relatively lesser growth because of the high base effect. I hope I am clear to you on that. All right. Then you write the second point below this, and just to highlight to you, this first point that you are writing, you know, if the first point that you are writing is something where the first point that you are writing is something which becomes the first point of highlighting the trend. All right, कि अगर कभी सिर्फ इंडस्ट्री पे पूछें तो ये आपका एक पार्ट बन गया आंसर का. All right, if it's only on industry, then this is how you will highlight that, okay, this is the industrial trend, consumer goods, capital goods, and overall industrial growth. All right, that is how you will highlight the trend. All right. Then you write the second point, that was the first one, B kind of. High growth in consumption expenditure due to rising income, release of pent-up demand, and increase in liberty to consume goods and services. Increase in liberty to consume goods and services. I hope, Rizwana, you got the base effect part. Okay. Now see, when you look at things, and remember one thing, why was the intermediate goods industry showing a growth which was slightly above 4%? Just, you don't need to write it, but just remember, there were not still days where India had started industrializing a lot. It was not still picking up. We are talking 51 to 56 here. Major part of industrialization began in India only post 56. And what are these intermediate goods industries? Intermediate goods industries are minerals, metals. They will be intermediate goods industries. You know, when you make a petroleum refined petroleum product, you're talking about an intermediate good. When you make nuts and bolts, fan belts for car, you're talking about an intermediate good. Intermediate goods are all those goods which are used for further production of goods and services for sale in the market. So all the raw material is what we call as intermediate. So in that case, when you are talking intermediate, you're talking about, say, nuts and bolts, you're talking about fan belts, you're talking about steel, you're talking about, say minerals like iron ore. All these are intermediate goods. 1951 to 1956 was not a time period in which we had industrialized big time. So even intermediate goods had not picked up much. So growth rate of intermediate goods was in the zone of approximately 4% period. Do I believe we can stay on that? All right. Now this point that you wrote, high growth in consumption expenditure due to rising income, release of pent-up demand, and increased liberty to consume goods and services. See, first of all, income level was rising for people. Since income level was rising for people, it implied that people would demand more consumption. Why? Why will it imply that? Can someone tell me? अगर इनकम लेवल बढ़ रहा है तो क्या जरूरी है कि कंजम्पशन ही बढ़ेगा? Why is it necessary? Why am I assuming that fair enough if income is rising, consumption will rise? I'll give you a hint. We were a poor country. Does somebody remember a term called marginal propensity to consume? And what do poors have? Higher marginal propensity to consume or lower marginal propensity to consume? Higher, because the basic needs have to be met. And what were we? बुरा लगता है बोलने में, है ना? पर थे तो वही. All right. So we were a poor country and we had a relatively higher marginal propensity to consume. For those of you who don't know marginal propensity to consume, A, read NCERT, B, I am telling you, it is the extra consumption that you would like to do from the extra income earned. So mind you, we were a comparatively poorer country. Now the income level was rising, so the intensity to consume will rise because the necessities were also not fulfilled as yet. So the marginal propensity to consume remained high. So in case it comes to your mind that, okay, why is he saying that there will be high growth in expenditure due to rising income? This is due to higher marginal propensity to consume, higher MPC. So due to that, there will be higher consumption with higher income. Then I used a term, release of pent up demand. So remember, whenever you use this term, pent up demand, this is demand restricted due to external factors beyond the control of consumers. All right, that is pent up demand. And that got released. Yes, correct, Samarpan, you're right. All right. There is a question that I see from one of your friends, and that can be your question also. That old man, you are contradicting yourself, kind of. The question is, yesterday you said that in the industrial growth trajectory of any economy, consumer goods grow first and then capital goods. But how were capital goods developing simultaneously in the initial years of development, considering we did not have financial capital? Because we were planning it. All right, the question is that if the historical path says that first there should be consumer goods growth and then there should be capital goods growth, how come in India we were having capital goods also growing along with the consumer goods and capital goods growing faster? And also we did not have financial capital to finance it. The answer to that is, if it comes to your mind also, the answer to that is we were not growing automatically. We were not growing organically. We were growing through planning mechanism in which Indian government was planning growth, and even though consumer goods industries had not fully flourished in India, even agriculture surplus was not coming very high in India, even savings rate were relatively low in India, still Indian government was focusing on development of capital goods industry. And how were we financing it? Mainly by taking loans and aid from foreign institutions. All right, that financing was coming through loans and aid from foreign institutions. All right, so in case it comes to your mind, where was the finance coming from? Itna capital goods kahan se aa raha tha? Well, we have a unique record, thankfully, a unique record. From 1951 till 1996, we were the largest borrower from World Bank, and from 1964 till 1991, we were the largest borrower from IMF. हमने किसी को पास भी नहीं आने दिया. We just didn't let anybody come close. We would keep borrowing. So in that case, borrowings became the source by which our investment money would come. And that is why India in those days was always vulnerable to economic collapse. Because if your entire growth is based on what people are doing or how people are willing to help you from outside, then you are always vulnerable to economic problems. So till 91 this existed, and we were going through like that. Do I believe I'm clear to all of you on these? All right. Now coming to this, when I use the word pent up demand, demand was pent up, as I told you, because the Britishers were restricting us from doing many consumption. You know, Indians not allowed to consume this, Indians not allowed to consume that. So we had the money and we had the desire, but we couldn't demand. We were not allowed to demand. Similarly, as I told you just now, Swadeshi and boycott were creating another pent up idea that people wanted to consume, but because they wanted to have participation in freedom movement and all, they didn't demand. Now, post-independence, both these factors went away. Post-independence, there was increase in liberty to consume goods and services. Government was putting no restriction on consumption of goods and services, and there was no Swadeshi and boycott movement. So all that meant that the pent-up demand got released. Do I believe you understand that? और आपको पेंट अप डिमांड तो बहुत आसानी से समझा सकता हूं मैं. अभी आप काम नहीं कर पा रहे, तैयारी कर रहे हो एक एग्जाम की, यू आर नॉट वर्किंग, यू आर प्रिपेयरिंग फॉर एन एग्जाम. Now many times you will see commodities in the market and you will say, all right, the day I earn, I'll buy it. That's your pent up demand. जिस दिन कमाओगे आप पूरी भड़ास निकालोगे. You know, घर में सब खरीद वरीद के बैठे रहोगे. सब दिख रहा है मुझे. You know, that's the release of pent up demand. That people accumulate demand mentally. That okay, I cannot buy it right now, I'll buy it later. And then once they have the freedom to do that, they buy it across. I can believe we are clear till here. So that is our second reason for the growth rate that we experienced between 51 to 56. And then you write third, there's one more reason in that. There was increase in demand for services like trading, due to which there was increase in output in services sector. Full stop. The demand for trading increased. In the same thing you continue. Demand for trading increased because trading was initially controlled by British traders but after independence it gradually started moving towards Indian traders. Full stop. Government, I hope you got this line, that initially the British would control it, gradually the Indians started controlling it, and that meant demand for trading by Indians started rising, the external trade part. Internally the government knew, see, yesterday also we discussed it, internally the government knew that we had been a subsistence economy, and government did not want that subsistence economy to continue because subsistence economies don't grow quick. So government wanted commercialization, saving, etc. to happen. So in that case, government was promoting market structures in many areas. All right. So retail trade, wholesale trade, that started picking up in India. again further contributing to service sector growth. All right. So you write in the same thing, internal trade growth was also high supported by government activities to promote marketing and distribution infrastructure. Marketing and distribution infrastructure. Marketing and distribution infrastructure. I'll give you an example. We were first of all, आप ध्यान से सुनना क्योंकि ये बातें समझनी जरूरी हैं आपके लिए. It's important for you to understand this. How do you develop a marketing and distribution infrastructure? First of all, you need to convince the consumers. That they can freely buy from the shopkeeper. And it begins by, most importantly, standardizing the product. So marks like ISI, marks like AgMark, So in that case, you are grading the product. That okay, the product is graded and the product is packaged properly and now it can be sold in the market and the consumers don't have to bother that I will get cheated in this sale. You understand that? So that was one part of creating distribution networks. Another was making sure that dealerships are established. You manufacture a product, how do you reach it to the people? So you need your dealership network, small shopkeepers, large shopkeepers, and the entire supply chain to be connected. Information network to be established. Why did we need all this? Because till 1947, we were not the country that we became post 1947. There was British India and there were princely states. So supply chains were broken. I can believe you understand supply chain. Supply chain would be, say somebody is a manufacturer, just to make sure that there is no doubt in your mind. So suppose you are a manufacturer. This manufacturer can buy raw material from say 2-3 people. And these raw material suppliers can have their own raw material suppliers. And then this manufacturer buys these raw material from these people. And then this manufacturer, after producing raw material, can take it to place where there is grading, can take it to place where there is packaging. All right? And then after getting the product graded and packaged, the manufacturer can take it to a place where it's a storehouse. All right? I'm just giving you the understanding. I will make you write logistical supply chain later on. That will be a different discussion. But I'm just explaining to you that what does it mean. And then from the storehouse, it can be transported to the wholesaler. And there can be several purchasers in between. But I'm just simplifying the supply chain. So it can be transported to the wholesaler. And the wholesaler can then connect to set of retailers. And all these retailers buy it from the wholesaler. Now somebody has to, and the manufacturer can have the connect with several wholesalers. And somebody has to make sure that all these connects are well established. And that is called your supply chain network. आप प्यार से इसको logistics chain भी बुलाते हो. All right? So somebody got to do that you establish link between manufacturer and the raw material suppliers, and then you establish the link between manufacturers and graders and packagers, and establish the link between manufacturer and the storehouse keeper, and then from there to wholesalers and retailers. So that is my supply chain network as it comes. All right, that is how the supply chain networks are developed. Do I believe we can understand that? But will this supply chain develop automatically? Well, possibly it can develop automatically, but that will take a very long period of time. ये नहीं होगा कि सप्लाई चेन अपने आप ओवरनाइट 5 साल में ग्रो कर जाएंगे. It will take a long period of time, people developing confidence on each other, gradually the structures being built, storehouses being developed, and so on. But that was not something that India could have afforded. We were not in that situation where we could have done that. So what did we do? We started with developing our supply chain network. The government started investing in public storehouses. The government, don't forget that there were days, still we have days, but there were days with very strict Essential Commodities Act and all, where you could not store commodities beyond a point. So government started developing its own storehouses. Government started developing its own retail, wholesale chain network. एग्रीकल्चर में ये सब बातें देर से हुई जब एपीएमसी मार्केट हुआ. In agriculture it happened much later with the APMC market. But in industry, the government was working hard to fulfill all these obligations. So what all this did, if you ask me, what all this did over the period was that then the government was taking care that these supply chain networks are established. But then what are these supply chain networks? At each end you have a service provider. A retailer is a service provider. A wholesaler is a service provider. A storehouse supplier is a service provider. I can believe my classroom is with me. So this is your service provision thing. These talks that we do is about your service provision thing. So service sector was also picking up with the supply chain development. You change the paragraph and write, service sector growth was also due to relatively faster increase in transportation services with road network development and growth of public administration. All right, so that was the reason why service sector was growing quickly. That there was growth of public administration, transportation services, so service sector growth was quick enough. Please understand, I gave you the reasons as industrial growth, consumption services, and consumption growth, and service sector growth. I will keep giving you industrial and services idea at each point. Agriculture, I am deliberately not getting into. That discussion we will do entirely in a separate form, because agriculture has its own nuances. Like, I can make you write agriculture was growing this much or not, but that won't make sense to you till you don't understand all that was happening in agricultural sector. So the trends on agriculture, I will discuss with you when I'm teaching you agriculture. I hope I make myself clear on that. That the trends on agriculture we will go into when I'm teaching you agriculture. Right now I'm giving you the GDP trend, the per capita trend, and the industry services sector trend to help you understand things. One of your friends asks me the year in which World Bank and IMF, I'll give you another point to look at it, even though these years are not important, but another point to look at it. Between 1957 to 1991, India visited IMF 14 times. And we remained the largest borrower from IMF. और जैसे अभी हम लोग पाकिस्तान को बोलते हैं ना, अरे ये तो बात पे IMF जाते हैं, यही हम लोग थे. We were just that. With the drop of hat, we were in front of IMF office. It was just that 1991 IMF borrowing is well remembered because they forced us to reform, and they forced us to reform because by then Cold War was over. We were playing our Cold War well. You know, that we will tell the Americans, look, we are a poor country, there is a lot of pressure to go communist. And the Americans would be very worried that already there is a China and there is a Soviet Union. If these guys go communist, it will mean practically all humanity is going communist, you know, because Chinese were heavily populated, we were heavily populated. So they would say, hang on, you need money, we give it to you. Don't go communist. And then we would go to the Soviets and tell them, you know, we badly want to be communists, but we are dependent on American money, what to do? And they say, oh, hang on, it's all right, take some money from us and keep the process going. So that's how we had been. And I am not objecting to that at all. I'm completely okay. ये कर रहे थे, कोई गलत बात नहीं थी. My objection is, which I will teach you in this discussion, these discussions itself, my objection is that while doing this, we took the money and we then frittered it away. We wasted it. We should have used that money for our development. But somewhere we kept wasting that money, and that's actually, if you ask me, the real problem. So we wouldn't have had a crisis in 91 if we had used that money well. Anyways, like many countries which are looking pretty developed today and were not so well developed in the past, actually backed themselves through Cold War by choosing a side here or there. For example, South Korea, or for, yes, Japan to some extent, but Japan was still much better even before Second World War. Second World War had disturbed them. But South Korea is a typical example, a very poor country relatively, in 1947. But then until 1968 also, till 1968, South Korea's per capita GDP was 78% of India's. Like they were lesser than India. And then they start growing, and today their per capita GDP is 13 times ours. But then a lot of their growth was because Americans were supporting them during the Cold War, and they made the most out of it. That they used that growth, and then they kept growing with that. Similarly, Chinese used American support a lot. I'm sure many of you would have read about how Nixon made friends with China in 1970s. तो अमेरिका के जो प्रेसिडेंट थे उन्होंने चाइना से दोस्ती कर ली 70s में, मेनली सोवियत यूनियन को वीक करने को. एंड देन बाय देन, thankfully for China, Mao died, so Deng came to power, and Deng was quite a pragmatic person. So Deng made sure that they don't make friendship for free. So then now they keep getting American money, and they keep growing, and they keep developing themselves, again playing the Cold War well. So that is the basic idea, that every country was doing, most of the countries were doing it, only that we should have been more careful in using that money. All right, now taking you into the next time period. The next time period is the time period which is 1956 to 1961. This is the second 5-year plan period, and actually the trends here were due to some major changes that India was going through in this time period. I first want you to write down few things and then take things further. NAM as a weapon, why not? No, ex-ante demand is different from pent-up demand, Abdul. All right, let's see this. You write, the year 1956 is important because India introduced second 5-year plan, and in a bracket you write Mahalanobis model, second 5-year plan, and in a bracket you write Mahalanobis model, and it also introduced second industrial policy resolution. It also introduced second industrial policy resolution. We will keep calling it IPR hereafter. Second industrial policy resolution, IPR is what we'll keep calling it, comma, both of which played an important role, both of which played an important role in developing basic features of India's development strategy, over next 35 years. Next 35 years is till 1991, from 1956 till 1991. In the same thing, you write, some of these features are and you can take them as A, B, C, D. So you write A, growth planned through heavy industries, comma, key industries and basic industries development, using capital intensive technology, Now understand this, when we use the word heavy industries, it means industries with large initial investment. And what is investment? Addition to capital goods, the money that you put in that. So heavy industries will be industries with large initial investment. For example, heavy engineering. Heavy engineering industries are those which make big industrial, rollers, big industrial metals, or trucks and cement mixers. That's heavy engineering. Or for example, heavy electricals. That is heavy industries. And similarly, when you use the word basic industries, that's metals and minerals. Refineries and so on. And don't bother about it, they can overlap. A basic industry can also be a heavy industry, but not necessarily. Or a heavy industry can also be a basic industry, but not necessarily, but they can overlap. And when we use the term key industries, that's infrastructure. Mainly industries like road, industries like railway, industries like electricity. So key industries will be infrastructure. So basic industries, metals and minerals, key are these, and heavy are which need large initial investment. I repeat again, they can very well overlap, so don't bother that, oh, but sir, this is heavy as well as key. Fully okay. Something can be railway is heavy as well as key. Alright, so that can always overlap. But these were the industries. Mahalanobis model was pretty clear. It said that India will grow using capital intensive technique. They gave two reasons of using capital intensive technique. They said one reason of using capital intensive technique is that we don't have enough skilled workers. So they said if we try using labor intensive technique, we can't use that because the skilled workforce is missing in India. And the second reason they said we are using capital intensive technique is because they said most of the technology available for promoting high growth is capital intensive in nature. Most of the technology available, because where was the technology coming from? It was coming from Soviet Union, or it was coming from United States, or it was coming from Britain. All these countries were countries which were not labor surplus. They were labor scarce countries. So they said, all right, these technologies that are coming in, they are capital intensive, and India cannot wait till it develops its own indigenous labor intensive technology. So we said, all right, we'll grow quicker. And that was the reason they also decided that we will grow with public sector industries as the benchmark. All right, so you write that as the second feature. Growth will be mainly directed, growth will be mainly directed through growth will be mainly directed through public sector units, which will be given the position of commanding heights, Now see, commanding heights means that public sector will be given all the important industries in the country. All right. For example, public sector will control metals, like say steel or aluminium. Public sector will control iron ore mining. Public sector can control coal mining. Public sector can control infrastructure like road and railways. And public sector can control important intermediate goods. What will that do? That will allow public sector to control even what will be produced by private sector. And that was the idea, that private sector will be allowed. It was a mixed economy that we had chosen. So private sector will be allowed, but private sector should be controlled indirectly by giving public sector the position of commanding heights. Now, अभी ये jigsaw puzzle है, ये धीरे धीरे इकट्ठा हो जाएगा. But later on, not right now, later on I'll teach you the role of public sector and role of private sector in India before 91. So again, we will have some discussion there. I'm assuming right now that all of us understand what is meant by public sector. That is all those enterprises or undertakings which are owned by the government. All right, that is public sector. That all enterprises or undertakings which are owned by the government. They are producing units, but these producing units are owned by the government. All right, that's public sector enterprises or undertaking. Now see, and just in case it comes to your mind that sir had said saving investment trend also, that's a separate discussion. That can't come with explanation part here. All right, so saving investment trend I will discuss with you separately. अगर नहीं रहा जा रहा, नहीं सर मुझे आज रात से पहले चाहिए वरना मुझे कुछ हो जाएगा, अगर ऐसी कोई बात है तो आपको जो नोट्स मैंने दिए हैं उसमें पूरे 2 पेजेस हैं. सेविंग्स के लिए पूरा 1 पेज और इन्वेस्टमेंट के लिए पूरा 1 पेज. आप खुद को बचा लेना. I don't want कि आपको कुछ हो जाए. But I'm sure you are clear that saving investment trend we will do separately. All right. But right now we will be doing these. I had a hand raised. Yes, yes. %2 growth rate मतलब? नहीं. Actually, okay. Since you ask, हालत कुछ ऐसी थी. 1900 to 1947, India's growth rate of GDP was 0.7% per annum. ठीक है, ये इंडिया की GDP growth rate थी, actual GDP growth 1900 to 1947. ठीक है, और इसी पीरियड में हमारा पॉपुलेशन जो है, our population growth was also around 0.6 to 0.7%. So we were just coming out of 2 world wars, colonialization and Great Depression. Along with that, almost 50 continuous years without any growth in per capita income. तो 2.1% भी heroic दिखता था हमें. कैसे 2% grow करके दिखाएंगे. You know, we were coming from that situation. Always remember, where you are coming from decides what you aspire to. अभी हमें यहाँ से उठा ले. अभी आप लोग सिविल सर्विसेज की तैयारी कर रहे हो, मैं आपको तैयारी करवा रहा हूँ. आपने खूब सारी फीस दी नेक्स्ट आईएएस को, मैंने खूब सारी पैसे ले लिए उनसे, ये सब हमारी लाइफ चल रही है। लेकिन अगर हमें अभी यहाँ से ट्रांसलोकेट कर दें एंड दे पुट अस इन अ सिविल वॉर जोन ऑफ डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक ऑफ कॉन्गो, तो थोड़ी ये तैयारी करेंगे हम लोग, जान बचाने के लिए भागेंगे। अभी तुम सुबह उठते हो तो सुबह उठ के खुश होते हो ये कि अरे आज तो मैं जिंदा हूं। वी डोंट फील हैप्पी अबाउट इट। अरे मेरा हाथ ठीक है, बिल्कुल पैर भी ठीक है, पर एक वॉर जोन में डाल देते, वही डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक ऑफ कॉन्गो भेज देते हैं। So if you are at Democratic Republic of Congo, and in the war zone of that, you'll wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm alive," because 5 would be dead besides you. तो तुम कह रहे 3-4 गए, मैं बच गया, oh thank you भगवान, मुझे बचा लिया। What I'm trying to teach you is that happiness is a function of expectations, and expectation is a function of intercept point. So your intercept point decides whether you are happy or not with the given result. The same result can make one set of person very happy, the other set of person pretty sad. We Indians are now used to 6-7% growth rate, so 4% makes us sad. You know, अरे 4% growth हुआ, क्या कर रही है सरकार हमारी? Those days we were coming out of this. So we thought, oh, if we grow 2%, that will be a wonderful achievement. Now, of course, we were growing like this because the Britishers were not letting us grow or achieve our potential. So we grew well, but then the expectations were not as much because we had never seen that growth. Like look at post 1991. Even post 1991, we had never seen that growth in the what we saw in the post 91 period. I'll teach you the whole history. You wait till I go there. But just to tell you, imagine what was 20th century for us, especially till 1980. I'll give you just a quick understanding. First 50 years, the per capita income did not grow. And then the next 32 years, we were also working hard. हम खूब hard work कर रहे थे कि हम तो grow नहीं करेंगे. You know? So we were working hard 47 to 79, our per capita income grew by 1.2% per annum. That is what frustrated Professor Raj Krishna to the extent he named it the Hindu rate of growth. You know? So why did he call it the Hindu rate of growth? Connoting India's rigidity. Before you get militant, you know, it was about connoting India's rigidity. That it was about how rigid we had become. You know, that socially we were rigid, we were fighting communally, we were fighting on caste. Economically we were rigid, and I'll teach you that rigidity. But all that meant India did not grow very quick, even though others around us were growing pretty fast, especially after 1960s. And that was what frustrated Dr. Krishna, and he said it's a Hindu rate of growth and this is not how we should grow. But सोच के देखिए आप, just think over this point, that from 1900 to 1947 there is no growth in per capita income, and from 47 there is to 79 the per capita income rises by 1.3%. Effectively from 1900 to 1979 we were hardly growing. Sorry. So this is where when you look at it, it tells us that we were actually going down. Just to give you one more number there, if I can take time, I'm sorry, सरकार के खिलाफ तो कुछ नहीं बोल रहा हूँ. And if I take position of Indian economy, अब ध्यान से सुनना इस बात को, we were the 6th largest economy in the world in 1951, in spite of everything that the British did to us. You know, whatever the British did, still they left us, or we were the 6th largest economy in the world. In fact, we were the 2nd largest when they had come to India. Now they left us 6th largest, no doubt. But I'll tell you why I was saying we were doing our hard work. By 1979, we were now the 13th largest economy. So we did our hard work to slide down. Others went ahead of us. And today again, 2022, we have come to something like the 5th largest. So we have gone through the whole distance. You know, what I'm trying to tell you by this is that this by 1991, I'm sorry, my mistake. By 1991, we were the 13th largest. So during the pre-reform era, these numbers surely show that we were growing much slower than rest of the world. And the rest of the world was doing better. That is why our ranking was sliding down. You know, that we were at 6th, then we reached 13th, then we go up to 5th, but we were sliding down in the global ranking position of India in GDP terms because of our policies which were not meant well and which were not executed well. So what I want you to understand is, and that story I'm telling you, and you will have to be patient for one more day apart from today to let me complete that story. But what I'm trying to teach you right now is that just to answer the question again, that why were we planning 2%? We were planning 2% because we couldn't even aspire for higher. So what we are, remember, in economics we use a term, I'm sure some of you would know this, that's called low-level equilibrium. You know? So sometimes you're in a low-level equilibrium, you are earning less, you are spending less, and you're feeling you are in equilibrium, but that equilibrium is actually keeping everybody's standard of living low. Now India was a typical example of low-level equilibrium till 1991. That we were earning less, we were consuming less, but somehow we were feeling this is life. That is how it should go. That is the missing link in Indian context, if you ask me. All right, then we shortage of resources post 51, or we created with our policy. Let me discuss that. No, that is what I am saying, that whatever we had, we could have done better, because imagine now, and let me tell you the whole story, you will get me much better. But from 47 to 61, we were still growing good. Then we must have done something not so regular, that from 61, the growth rate started impeding. And from 66, it just slid down. And then again picked up only after 1980s. And properly picked up only after 91. So we were doing some wrong policies. सिर्फ रिसोर्स की कमी दिक्कत नहीं थी. I'll teach you that. That's of course where we are moving towards. So I'll take you into that. All right, let's see this then. See, always remember one thing. Whenever your growth rate goes below the normal radar that it should be in, always try finding the reasons or the faults in the economic policies or policies around us. Never try finding a reason which is outside the policy domain. Applies, as your coach I am telling you that, applies on your preparation also. The more you are inward looking and find a problem point within, the more quickly you will solve it. You know, human system goes defensive. No, everything is fine around, it's because of external factors that I am unable to do well. Well, external factors will have a role. I'm not saying that they don't have a role, but only external factors can't pull you down if you are striving. I'll give you an example. Many people in India will tell you that the 1991 crisis in India was because of the Gulf War, the war between Iraq and US, and due to that the oil prices went up, and due to that we had a crisis. Fair enough, that was one of the reasons, but had it been only for the Gulf War, then we should have had a much more severe crisis today. Because oil prices are much higher today. We should have had a much severe crisis in 2013, in 2008. So India did something right post 91. And what we did right, I'll teach you. That's my job, of course, but I'll teach you. But I'm putting the insight in your mind that India did something right post 91, due to which we had bigger shocks than a Gulf War post 91, but we didn't have an economic crisis post 91. The countries which have not done it well, like say Pakistan or Sri Lanka, they are having their shocks. Those series of factors started with 1970s is what I'm trying to tell you. No, again think, if disintegration of USSR would be a factor, then India loses a big supply chain right now in Russia and Ukraine war. Imagine it like this. If I am having high blood pressure, I am having high blood sugar, and then I go to a party, have a binge, and I don't find a taxi and I die from heart attack, then you can't say that, oh, Vibhas died because he had a binge and there was no taxi. I died because I already had a high blood sugar, I already had a high blood pressure, and I had high blood sugar and high blood pressure because of my toxic habits in the past. Now, Indian economy had high blood sugar and high blood pressure by 1991 itself. So we became moribund with one shock that happened. क्योंकि अगर यूएसएसआर के कोलैप्स से दिक्कत होती तो जितने लोग कम्युनिस्ट ब्लॉक में थे उन सबकी हालत खराब हो जानी चाहिए थी. सबकी तो हालत खराब नहीं हुई. पोलैंड डिड प्रीटी वेल, रोमानिया डिड प्रीटी वेल. So you know, always look for things. never go by a thought process where you get a sample size 2 and you get your proof size 2 and you say, oh, go, hang on, I got it. हमारे यहाँ ऐसा ही कहा जाता है, ओ अगर इंडिया डिक्टेटरशिप होता तो इंडिया की कुछ और बात होती, देखो चाइना को, तो देखो लीबिया को और देखो इराक को, एक ही डिक्टेटरशिप क्यों देखते हो? और चाइना को भी देखो, चाइना कितने लोग जाना चाहोगे वो देख लो. I mean, let's do a wholesome debate, no? Otherwise, it's very simple to say, let's have a dictatorship and let's have a strong rule that will save India. Look at China. So how many of us would actually like to take a visa to China? To stay over there, leaving India? Would love to know that. And compare that to how many would like to take a similar visa to, say, United States. And why do people would like to go to United States even though supposedly it's a declining power, right? And Chinese are the rising sun. Because who would like to go to a dictatorship? So before you start reaching your conclusions, because we think there will be something called benevolent dictator. Well, that's an oxymoron. Benevolent people are not dictators and dictators are not benevolent. So these are nice words created. Always be very careful that when you are taught things, when you are told things from a particular perspective, judge the perspective and be multifaceted. That is what and I'll keep teaching you this. That's my habit, because I have trained myself or tried training myself to be that initially I won't take a sample size 5 or a 10 to give myself an answer. I would need a larger sample and a better method and then cross comparisons, and then I reach my conclusions that, okay, this can be the reason of what is happening. So that is how I want to train my kids, which is you, of course, that you should also try going through various facets before you reach a conclusion, अच्छा ये बात इसी की वजह से हो रही है. अगर सोवियत यूनियन के कोलैप्स से इंडिया में क्राइसिस होता तो इंडिया को 57 से 91 के बीच में आईएमएफ में 14 टाइम्स नहीं जाना पड़ता. क्राइसिस तो इसलिए हुआ कि आईएमएफ ने कहा मैं पैसे नहीं दूंगा. IMF said, I'm not giving you money. Now the Cold War is over. Now it was not that IMF didn't want to give us money. And if that was not the case, then many economists in India, ranging from people like Dr. Manmohan Singh to Montek Singh Ahluwalia to V.K. Malhotra, there were many, Arvind Virmani, there were several economists who were already writing papers about how Indian economy is doing badly. There is a very good book, it's called 25 Years of Economic Reforms. It's edited by an ex-RBI governor, V.K. Malhotra sir, and he was one of the economists also in India. And it has 50 essays, almost remnants of economists in 1991-92, who were all saying that what all was happening then and how reforms were done. Now all these guys were mentioning that from 70s and 80s, it was becoming clear that India is not on the right path. So that is what we have to keep in mind, that gradually the morass doesn't set in immediately. तो ऐसा थोड़ी होगा कि तुम आज चिप्स खाओगे या आज चीनी 2 चम्मच खा लोगे तो तुम्हें कल डायबिटीज निकल आएगा. ये तो सालों की मेहनत का नतीजा होता है. That after a lot of hard work, year after year, you reach a situation when you suddenly one day see a crisis. So India's crisis also was similar, and you will have to keep patience. As I told you, I'll teach you the whole story in all details about how we reached that crisis situation. But remember, the first 10 years of India's development, this time period and 51 to 56, were quite promising for India. We were doing pretty decent. Any which way, so before I take you into the trends, I'll take you into the features and finish that off. So I hope the commanding heights word is understood by us. So of commanding heights, and in the same thing you write, with basic objectives of keeping price in control, generating more employment, balanced regional growth, balanced regional growth, comma, restricting concentration of wealth, restricting concentration of wealth, and earning profit for welfare of the people. Earning profit for welfare of the people. Now, one question is raised sometimes in this growth process or on this growth process, and that question is raised by one of your friends also, that if we knew all that, why did we choose capital intensive? That would put more pressure on our growth prospects because we had less funds with us. Now, you know, 70 years later, it's always easy to be wiser. You know, अगर मुझे भी 50 साल बाद बोलोगे कि 50 साल पहले क्या करना चाहिए था, बता दूंगा. You understand that? So, I'm so sorry, just got reminded of something that my father would tell me. I was born on 12th January, Vivekanand ji's birthday, and my mother wanted to name me Vivek. And my father always told me that I told her he doesn't deserve it. Don't name him that. So then I was named Vibha. So just that thought came to my mind. So bear with me, sorry. कि मैंने वो बात जो है ना 50 साल पहले कुछ बदल सकते थे, तो मैं वही कहा, फादर ने मेरे बदल दिया, तो कहा he doesn't deserve it. Don't let him call him Vivek. बेकार एक अच्छे आदमी का नाम खराब करेगा. But anyways, and that's true. If I can be even 1% of Vivekanand ji, I would be a very successful person. But any which way, coming to my point, what I'm trying to tell you is that in hindsight, we are all wiser. 10 years ago, what India should have done, well, today we can always say that, we should have done this and we should have done that. We have to understand what they were planning to do in the contemporary of the event. So if you go back to 1950s, India was not doing something which was extraordinarily different from what others were doing. Others were also planning capital intensive growth. Others were also taking loans from places like World Bank, etc. They were also trying to grow at a higher rate by first focusing on capital goods. So in that case, saying that Indian planners were at mistake, I would believe is not entirely being judicious to them. That is not justifiable. Yes, in hindsight we know it didn't work very well for India over a long period, but then there were various reasons, and those reasons were dynamic in nature. Alright, there were various reasons, and those reasons were dynamic in nature. So it was not that the reasons happened immediately or automatically. Those reasons happened because of our errors also that happened across. Also remember, one more thought can come to your mind. I told you that there were economists who were writing against it and so on. Then a thought can come that if they were writing against it, then why course correction was not done? The problem, remember, is always about A, believing what is being written against the popular policy of the day, and B, realizing that or understanding that there are genuine criticisms. Even today many things are happening, and not everybody agrees with many things that happen, but the governments go ahead and do that. Similarly, economists suggest many things which are bad, and thankfully the government sometimes don't do them, because the other economists can suggest don't do it. See, when we say economists, when we say bureaucrats, we use a common noun, but actually this common noun is highly bifurcated. हम लोग कहते थे ना bureaucrats ने ऐसा कहा, but सारे bureaucrats एक जैसा थोड़ी बोलते हैं. हम कहते economists ने ऐसा बोला, but all economists don't speak in the same language. So in that case, if there are 10 people speaking one language, there will be 10 other people speaking some other language, and then the choice lies on the popular wisdom of the day, that what side you take and which way you go. I'm sure many of you would be reading newspapers for a couple of years now, at least. 2 years back, in 2020, there were a set of very popular economists who were continuously saying India should print money and distribute it among people. Thankfully we did not do that. Because if we had printed money and distributed among people those days, inflation would have gone through the sky today. So when you look at it, Many people, in fact, even as good people as Dr. Abhijit Banerjee. Even he was saying that this should be done. You know what? There is no shame in going wrong. All of us go. ये भी हमारा ही कल्चर है जहाँ रॉन्ग होने पे हम 2 दिन तक याद है तुम गलत हुए थे ना तुम ही थे जरूरत ही नहीं है going wrong is as normal as going right, especially in academics or anything. I believe in life, but at least in academics I can do 10 predictions and I can go wrong on 3 of them or 4 of them. There is no problem because all predictions are done with some assumptions in my mind, and I am no God, so I can go wrong. There is no issue in that. But the point is that if I have gone wrong, then I should also introspect that, look, maybe my thought process was not right, and therefore I should revise my thought process so that next time the same error is not repeated. Sometimes I see that part missing in many people who sometimes feel very confident that no, I am someone who has achieved so much, I can't go wrong. All of us can go wrong. I repeat again, all of us can go wrong. Or at any point of time. And there is no shame, I repeat, in going wrong. Going wrong is normal to humans. So that is what happened, that many economists would talk on one line, many on another. So that is why also it is not easy for government to decide. In fact, on that I can tell you a joke. It's an economist's joke. During the Great Depression, it was said that F.D. Roosevelt was saying that get me an economist who has only one hand. Because in economics we always have theories which says if you do this, this will happen. On the other hand, this can also happen. So he said that all these guys come and they say this will happen. On the other hand, that will happen. Get me someone with one hand. So that I would know what to do exactly during the Great Depression. So fair enough, we are people with the other hand, isn't it? So we always come up and say on the other hand that can happen. So this is where economics is a tough discipline. In fact, somebody if tells you, हमारे ऊपर jokes बनते हैं जो मैं okay हूँ, jokes तो होने ही चाहिए. But when somebody says seriously that economics is not a good discipline because people assume so much, well, we are a difficult discipline because we have to predict the most unpredictable thing in this world, human behavior. So we are a difficult discipline. We got to work under assumptions. We got to work under very difficult situations because we are trying to predict something which doesn't remain consistent. I mean, if you hit a bear, if you hit a chimpanzee, you hit a lion, you know what they will do. You hit a human, you don't know. So in that case, we are comparatively unpredictable lot. So you got to be careful that when you predict Indian economic systems, they have their own challenges. All right. I just thought that I would clear a few cobwebs from your mind in case during my discussion they crop up. Now what we do is we go to the C part of it, third feature. In the second feature, you add just one more line. I'm sorry. Just add one more line in the second feature. Under second IPR is Industrial Policy Resolution. Under second IPR, Seventeen industries were reserved. 17 industries were reserved for 17 industries were reserved for public sector investment. Public sector investment. All right, I can believe that my classroom understands the difference between firms and industry. Firms will be one unit and industry will be the cluster, isn't it? Like Maruti Suzuki can be a firm and automobile is the industry. So 17 industries were reserved is what we are saying here. So 17 industries were reserved exclusively for public sector part, and that meant, what it meant was that in these industries, private sector could not invest, and if there existed a private sector, then they would nationalize it. Nationalization means the government will take over the company. All right. So private sector इसमें allowed ही नहीं थे, If private sector was not invested in it, they will not be allowed to invest. If by chance private sector had invested in it, then they will be nationalized. No private sector was allowed in these industries. So there were industries like airline, there were industries like steel. Gradually steel was removed. There were industries like iron ore mines, telecom, banking. So there were gradually several industries were put in and taken forward. But Industrial Policy Resolution 56 did not have banking and all or airline and all. It had several other industries. But 17 industries kept under exclusive reservation only for public sector to give them the position of commanding heights. My point is that. All right, so that the public sectors could get the position of commanding height. And then you write another one. The plan, next point, yeah, next feature. The plan was to develop, consumer goods industry, through small scale industrialization, mainly under the control of private sector. Full stop. To assure that there is no overproduction, or no shortage, comma, licensing was introduced as an entry barrier. I can believe entry barrier is understood by us, that those who don't have a license cannot enter the market as producers. And licensing meant that government will choose the producers, give licenses to them, and only those who have the license can produce. This was done so that it should not create a situation that few commodities which are more in demand are produced in surplus, while few other commodities which are less in demand are in scarce production. All right, that was the purpose. कि कुछ commodities की shortage ना हो और कुछ के surplus ना हो जाए. All right, that was the objective. Judicious use of resources, as they called it in those days. And then you write one more. Next point, yeah. The policy of import substituting industrialization was proposed and approved to assure that India becomes self-sufficient. Now, that was again a typical feature of those days. there were reasons. In fact, one of your friend mentions it online also, and you are right. She asked me whether I'm right in reading it. You are right. That many in India were worried that we had been colonized because of trade, and we don't want again to be colonized by remaining dependent on trade. So there were many people who were votaries of industrial diversification. What is industrial diversification? What is industrial diversity? So when you produce various types of commodities within your economy, then that is industrial diversity. So many people were proposing this, that we should have industrial diversification, we should not remain dependent on outsiders to buy things so that they don't control us. Also there was a fear, there was a Cold War going on, so there was a fear that if we remain dependent on them for our important imports, whether US or USSR, they can still control us. So that was again a factor that drove us. Also don't forget there was that global system. First World War, Great Depression, Second World War, the trust factor among countries was pretty low. Now with the trust factor low, it will become very difficult for countries to assume that I should go ahead and believe that somebody else will supply what I want. You understand that? That was the problem with trust factor remaining low. That people will be worried that think like this. What is happening in today's world? Again, you can do a cross connect there and you will understand. When we say self-reliance, of course, self-reliance is different from self-sufficiency. जब आप बोलते हैं हम आज के डेट में इंडिया बोलती है we'll be आत्मनिर्भर भारत. Now आत्मनिर्भर भारत is self-reliant India. So self-reliant is different from self-sufficiency of those days. Self-sufficiency of those days was saying we will not be trading much, we will not be exporting much, and we will not be importing much, and we will try becoming more and more self-sufficient, everything produced in our country. Atmanirbhar Bharat, the self-reliant India story is that we will try producing certain important things of supply chain, and let others produce the important things of supply chain, and let India become an important part of global value chain, so that we can also gain from others, others gain from us. So we are not saying that we will not export or import. We are also not saying that we will not allow foreigners to invest in my country. All this is what we were saying pre-91. So when I will teach you India after 91, I'll again bring this back. But I'm trying to clarify it right now, that at least according to what the government has been saying and government papers have been saying, they have never said that Atmanirbhar means India should produce everything. Or even, I'll just take a second, or if even India should produce majority of the things. It is being said in the papers, whether by Niti Aayog or Ministry of Finance, that the idea is to make India an important contributor to global value chain, and certain essential commodities which can be future strategic importance, like semiconductors or like rare earth. For this India should have a proper supply established so that we don't struggle for them tomorrow if Chinese refuse to give it to us. You understand that? Like active pharmaceutical ingredients. So these are all sectors where if the inputs are not there, you cannot produce any output, and then the whole industry gets paralyzed. But my point was different. My point was, now think, why has the world reached this situation? Abhi baat ho rahi hai na, China +1, and we should invest in other countries. How did we reach here? Because during the hyper-globalization phase, post-1991, and then globalization happened. So during this globalization phase, the countries started believing that it doesn't matter, anybody can produce anything, and we will outsource it, and then we can import it to our country, we will assemble it, and that created this global supply chain, isn't it? Krugman got a Nobel Prize for it. He talked about intra-industry trade, and he said that with this intra-industry trade, the world is growing. So, but the problem happened when again the deglobalization process began, especially post 2008 with the subprime crisis. Then gradually it became worse with Russians fighting the Ukrainians in Crimea and the Americans putting sanctions on them. Became even worse with the Chinese and Americans going loggerheads during the Trump regime. So gradually the world in the last 8-9 years realizes that all the trust we were putting on each other is not working out. There can be sudden shortage of commodities, as we saw during COVID pandemic, especially with Chinese following a very strict zero COVID policy. I hope I am making sense to you. Now I am trying to teach you this. So if you can drive an analogy अगर तुम अभी से समझ सकते हो इस बात को, तो इसे कनेक्ट करो जो हो रहा होगा 1950s में. Countries had gone through a First World War, then a Great Depression. Imagine 14 to 19, First World War. By the time you start breathing back, Great Depression. By the time you start breathing back, Second World War. And then countries coming out of colonization. What kind of trust they will have on others? You understand that? And again, India was not alone in it. Americans, Europeans, everybody was trading with very high protection. Lot of import duty established, lot of quantitative restrictions put, import quota in place. All this was the case in 1950s. Where did we start going wrong? So in 1950s, when we made this policy, we were not going wrong. We started going wrong sometimes around 1970s, because by then the world had started opening up. The East Asian economies were showing export-led growth. The Japanese had shown that an Asian country can become developed by exporting to the Europeans and Americans. But somehow we were not realizing this, because we had our own ideological battles to fight. So we were ideologically more to the left, as we call it, and we didn't realize that this was happening. And if you ask me, that is where we missed the growth process. That ideally by 1970s we could have, that's why I mean, it was just dark humor, but that is why a little while back I told you that thankfully for China, Mao died. Because Mao was an old school fellow. He would have never reformed China. Deng was a practical person. Deng did not believe in just talking revolution. He thought, okay, let me give good life to my people and they will support the party anyways. So Deng changed it that way. There is a very good book on Deng by Ezra Vogel, V-O-G-E-L. Whenever you get hold of it, not right now, abhi to aap busy ho apne exam mein, but it's a wonderful book on Deng Xiaoping. It's a biography of his. It's a thick book. It's around 1100 pages, but it's a very interesting book. In fact, I read that book entirely on my one flight moving from India to US actually. It was एक flight की read की हुई किताब थी मेरी. That I could go through that because it was such an interesting book. Couldn't take my eye off it. तो वो पूरे 15-16 घंटे यही करता गया था मैं. तो अच्छी किताब है, लेकिन अभी आपको पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. अभी जो किताबें पढ़नी है वही पढ़ लो तो काफी है. But 1100 पेज हैं, तो इतने तो हो जाएंगे. So coming to this, now when you talk on that here, so this was what was happening globally. So India not doing well. Again, 50s was not the time when we thought that we should not be protectionist. It was normal to be protectionist. I'm preparing you for few things here. मैं आपसे ये बातें जानबूझ के करता हूँ. God willing एक समय जब वो आएगा जब तुम इंटरव्यू जाओगे, तो वहां पर ये बातें बहुत उठती हैं. In interview panel, even if you read the transcripts, you will see many times in the last 7, 8, 9 years, they have been putting questions about why did India make policies the way we made in 50s, and do you think we were correct in doing that or incorrect? Can you justify or not justify, and so on. So remember, 50s, well, nobody can say that anybody would have known what is going to happen next. Yeah, maybe by 70s we were in a situation where we were seeing what was happening around us. But then remember, it was happening around us. So when things are happening around you, still you need to have wisdom to understand what's exactly happening around you. And it was not that we were not learning at all. We were learning slightly. That is why slight reforms started in 1980s. But still the belief system was so huge in what India had been that we didn't go for full-fledged reforms. For that we needed a crisis. So it was not. And plus remember one more thing. We are doing something not correct, realizing it and taking action to rectify it are two very different things. तुम सबको तो पता ही है ना कि तुम्हें पढ़ना चाहिए, पर हर दिन थोड़ी होता है ऐसा, क्योंकि वो पर्टिकुलर डे की बात होती है. There are days in which you don't study, there are days in which you study, but every day you got to study. So that is the difference between knowing what is right and being able to actually conduct on what is to be done right. So by 70s and 80s, India was going through that phase, that we somewhere knew that what was right, but then ideological battles and reluctance to change, and then there was, always remember, when you make policies, there will be interest groups involved. Understand that also. Interest groups won't let you change so easily. They will invoke other factors, poors will suffer, etc. kind of syndrome. So this is where you got to be careful, that policies have their own, what do we call this in economics? When you make a bad policy, and then when you change it, and still the impact is felt after years? Policy paralysis is when people just don't make a policy. This is called, you must have heard this name, especially those of you who are coming from economics background, it's called hysteresis effect. You know, coming from the word hysteria. That you make a good policy and or a bad policy, even when the policy is removed, for some years the impact is felt. You know, that is the hysteresis effect of it. So hysteresis effect of some of the bad policies of India have been felt for very long, you know, that we were making. All right, now, world started opening by early 60s and was quite opened up by 70s. मुझे एक बार 70s पढ़ाने दो तो मैं बेहतर हालत में रहूंगा तुम्हें ये बात सीक्वेंशियली समझाने के. अभी बोलूंगा भी ना तो गैप्स रहेंगे, ठीक है? So why India went wrong in 70s, I will definitely teach you that, but let me reach, as I go further, you will get the sequence of how things happened. ठीक है? That will be better. All right, let's see this then. Now you write the trends in that what were the trends in this time period. Correct, Srishti? Hysteresis is the answer. All right, now when we look at the trends in this period, 56 to 61, GDP growth kept increasing above 4%. I'll just put some data for you and then we can discuss that. So, GDP growth rate was 4.2% per annum. GDP growth rate was 4.2% per annum. And this was slightly below the target. The target this time was 4.5%, but GDP growth rate was slightly below the target. But that was because, I'm just putting it for you, that was because there was a recession in 1957-58. I believe you know this, but still, just for the sake of clarity, recession means negative growth in GDP or fall in GDP. So we had a recession in 1957-58, a negative growth in GDP or a fall in GDP, and still the economic growth rate remained 4.2%, suggesting that in rest of the time period it was above 5%. All right, so we were doing pretty decent. 57-58 was a bad year. We had a bad BOP crisis. So what's a BOP? I can believe you have heard of the term balance of payment. Yeah. So what's a BOP crisis? When we don't have enough foreign exchange to pay for the deficit that we are having on balance of payment. If we are having a deficit on balance of payment, अगर हमें बाहर वालों को पैसे देने हैं और हमारे पास पैसे हैं ही नहीं उन्हें देने को, तो हमें BOP पे crisis face करना पड़ता है. So when we don't have enough money to pay for our foreign exchange, to pay for our requirements, then we face a BOP crisis. So 1957-58, we had a very bad drought, and I'm sure all of you know that we had to import our food to sustain, and that bad drought meant that we had to import much more food. Also, we had started industrializing big time now, so we needed a lot of raw materials. And these raw materials were another problem part because many of them had to be imported, like crude oil, copper, gold, you know. So all that meant that suddenly when India's foreign exchange requirements went up and we didn't have enough reserves with ourselves, we had a BOP crisis. And due to that BOP crisis, industrial output started the GDP growth started becoming negative. Do I believe the story is understood? All right. And within this period, overall, industrial growth, you know, within this period, overall, industrial growth was above 9%. It was 9.6% actually. Industrial growth was above 9%. It was 9.6%. Capital goods industry was growing in double digits, 11.1%. capital goods industry was growing in double digits. Intermediate goods were also showing healthy growth at 8%, and consumer goods were also growing at 6.9%, all per annum, of course. So overall, industrial growth was high. Industrial growth, again, capital goods industry were the real benchmark. They were growing in double digits. Intermediate goods was still growing at 8%, and consumer goods at 6.9%. All right. Again, now what was happening was that government was putting a lot of effort in developing industries, and that was leading to high industrial growth in India. I'm making you write that up. I can assume you have written this down. Below this, you please write, below this, high growth in capital goods industry, high growth in capital goods industry was due to high growth in capital goods industry was due to very large increase in planned investment in heavy and key industries. In heavy and key industries. Very large increase in planned investment in heavy and key industries. All right, that is the reason that capital goods industries were doing so well. In a bracket you write, plan expenditure, I can believe we understand the expenditure according to 5-year plan for the purpose. Plan expenditure was raised by 14% for capital goods industry and 20% for overall industrialization. 20% for overall industrialization. All right. In the same thing you write, development of intermediate goods was mostly observed in ancillary industries, ANCILLARY, ancillary industries. Ancillary industries are component suppliers. All right, ancillary industries are component suppliers. So in ancillary industries, mainly in heavy industries sector. Heavy industries sector. And one more thing you write, the growth in consumer goods, was in large scale industries. Now that is where the plan was going wrong. The plan was that consumer goods will be developed through small scale industries and that can create more employment. But consumer goods were growing, but were growing mainly through the large scale industries. So the plan was not working the way we would have liked it to. All right. So the same thing you write, large scale industries mainly located in urban regions on western coast of India. Mainly located in urban regions on western coast of India. Mumbai, Ahmedabad, they were the places where it was growing good. All right, the cotton textile mills and mills related to production of food, beverages, these industries were developing very quickly. All right. In fact, one quite surprising development was that perfume industry was developing very fast in India. And to be honest, I don't know the reason. I only know the data. That perfume industry was developing very fast in this time period. I tried searching that what was the reason, but there is no mention of it anywhere. But the data shows that the growth was quite high in this time period. And there is no circumstantial thing also to follow as to what could have made it happen. It was not that suddenly India would have started loving perfume or something. Even our exports didn't pick up. It was not that we were exporting it a lot. But the industry did show some high increase, especially in the time period 56 to 66 overall. Then you write a second point in the trend itself, like this was the trend. So within the trend, you write a second point. No, the center was southern India. All right, Kerala and Malabar coast. That is where there was a lot of development. Then you write one more thing in this. The recession of 1957-58, the recession of 1957-58 was due to lack of कनेक्शन लूज कर दिया हमने कब से अभी ठीक है थैंक यू that is one issue that happens when you teach online अभी तो आपके दोस्त यहां आए नहीं हैं tell me one thing in the meantime we get connected but you tell me one thing I thought large scale industries will create more jobs than small scale industries. Skilled labor which yeah I was getting yeah there was some answer I was getting okay the migration part skilled part understand this first of all the capital intensive industries, the large scale industries can provide more jobs provided they are labor intensive. But given the labor laws in India and given the difficulties in finding skilled workforce in India, the companies started preferring capital intensity. Capital intensive means using more machines rather than workers. Also remember the large scale industry or small scale industry doesn't matter. We have 6.2 crore small scale industries in India, as I told you yesterday, and we have 11 crore jobs created by them, which means small scale industries don't necessarily create, jobs. So if we want jobs, it has to be a system where you create medium scale industries and with technology which is labor intensive. All right, that is what we have to talk about. So always when such questions are raised, take a nuancical approach to it. अविनाश कहाँ पहुंचे हम लोग ठीक है all right okay so I repeat again large scale industries or small scale industries it is not necessary that one can create job and the other cannot normally you expect small scale industries to use more labor intensive technique and large scale industries to use more capital intensive technique. Normally you would expect small scale industries to use more labor intensive technique and small scale industries to use capital intensive technique and small scale to use more labor intensive. So since you expect small scale to use more labor intensive, it is deduced by that if you grow by small scale, you will have more employment. Do I believe it will remain with you? All right, when I will teach you labor market and all, in any case we will bring it back. तो अगर कभी कोई आपसे पूछे कि स्मॉल स्केल इंडस्ट्री ग्रो करने से क्या लेबर एम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ेगा, तो आपका आंसर होना चाहिए एज एन इकोनॉमिक स्टूडेंट, एवरीथिंग एल्स रिमेनिंग कांस्टेंट बढ़ेगा. You understand that? That if it is ceteris paribus, if everything else remains constant, then if you go small scale, employment rises. But everything else doesn't remain constant. And that becomes a challenge part. All right. Okay, we just go into this again. I'm repeating myself. So the recession of 1957-58, the recession of 1957-58, the second point in this, was due to lack of foreign exchange reserve, due to lack of foreign exchange reserve which created BOP crisis, full stop. In the same thing you write, the BOP crisis was due to severe drought which increased import of food and it was due to increase in import of raw material in a bracket you can write intermediate goods, close the bracket, like crude oil, gold, copper, and industrial components, like nuts and bolts kind of things for machines, that's industrial components, and industrial components not available in India. Industrial components not available in India. Full stop. Very fast industrialization resulted in very high imports, and it converged with the drought. दोनों एक साथ हो गए. All right, with the drought, due to which there was shortage of raw material, and recession. full stop. In the same thing you also write, the recession resulted in two important events one, establishment of Aid for India Forum, AID, Aid for India Forum at World Bank, because the real reason was that World Bank had said they will give us aid, and then due to bureaucratic delays they did not send it to us on time. Many people suggest, economic historians, that Americans were trying to punish us for getting closer to the Soviets, because our Indian Prime Minister had visited Soviet Union 3 times in a row in 3 years, and he had not entertained the Americans much. So suddenly World Bank forgot sanctioning money. So many people suspect that. We can't say that on record, but many people suspect that just might have happened. And we had a crisis then. And second thing you write, India invited a team from Ford Foundation, FORD. Ford Foundation is an American think tank. So a team from Ford Foundation to suggest agricultural reforms to increase India's food productivity. Now again, I deliberately gave you more words on this topic. The way I see things going, it's possible that sometimes they can ask you to write a short note, something like 100 words, 150 words, connecting it to something else, of course, on the BOP crisis of 57-58. Sometimes they can ask you to comment on the BOP crisis in India before 1991. Like 91 was a BOP crisis, but before 91 there were 2-3 other years. 66-67 was another year, then 72-73 was another year, 80-81 was another year, 79-80. So there were several years in India before 1991 that we had a BOP crisis. So we should have a basic understanding as to what these crises were and what did India do. So that in case they ask us to comment on BOP crisis in India before 91, we should have our 150 words ready for those BOP crisis before 91. So that was the reason I gave you 70-80 words here, that okay, on 57-58 we have something ready on the BOP crisis. Now remember, the population growth rate in this time, that will be our third point, but I'm just putting it for you. The population growth rate in this time period was found to be 2.3%. Again, NSSO numbers, 2.3%, while the census data suggested 2.1% for the whole decade. So again, these small differences can happen. 1951 to 56, 2.2, 56 to 61, 2.3. NSSO के numbers ये थे, लेकिन अगर आप census का data देखोगे, India's population growth between 51 to 61, that came at 2.1. So now, we will not be able to conclude exactly, but since they are not very different from each other, so we can live with them. All right. So the population growth rate was 2.3. That again meant that our overall per capita income growth was around 2%. The per capita income growth was around 2%. So that is our third point. You write, that is C, that is. I mean, इसका third point नहीं है ये. Crisis over हो गया अब. अभी आगे बढ़ गए. All right. तो आप third point लिखना trends का. All right. In the trends, you write the third point, C. Per capita income increased at approximately 2% per annum, approximately 2% per annum, which was considered sufficient, which was considered sufficient for long-term stable growth, for long-term stable growth of India. All right. If they ask you something, chances are very less, but then you never ignore anything. But if they ask you the trends and analysis of one particular 5-year plan before 1991, it has to be the second 5-year plan. All right. That is why I was spending all this time. All right. That अगर कभी पूछेंगे आपसे कोई एक 5-year plan, तो वो second होगा. और उसके बाद जो सबसे ज़्यादा पॉपुलर है वो है फोर्थ. Alright, so 69 to 74 and 56 to 61. These are the two 5-year plans that we should know well. So I was spending some more time on this time period. That and again, 5-year plans will be separate, but this time period is important. So this is what we should know well. Now, when we look at the third time period here, 61 to 66, I'll be just introducing the basic things in this to you. Few things here. One was actual GDP growth rate declined to 3.6% per annum in this time period. So that was one factor that was bothering us badly. That for the first time after independence, GDP growth declined to 3.6% per annum. That was 61 to 66, the last quinquennial of this whole time period. Like if you recall, when I started the class, I told you that the first time period is 51 to 66. So in this 51 to 66, the 61 to 66 is our last time period, and we see that the growth rate started falling here. The second thing that happened here was industrial growth increased to 12% per annum, and industrial growth increased to 12% per annum, and capital goods industry increased at 17% per annum. But then some people say this was mainly because of the war. That India had 62 war and 65 war, so a lot of defense equipment purchase and procurement and production and so on, vehicle production, all this was happening. So capital goods industry was showing a growth due to that. That is also an assessment by many economists. And so at 17% per annum, while consumer goods declined to 5.8% per annum. Consumer goods declined to 5.8% per annum. In this only you write, the decline in consumer goods growth, combined with rising demand for consumer goods, due to rising population rising population and comparatively higher income. Like India's income had increased in the last 15 years and population had increased in the last 15 years. So demand for consumer goods was higher. Income resulted in shortage of consumer goods like textile, footwear, furniture, processed food, etc. In the same thing, you write, in fact, that was the time when India developed a culture, abhi bhi wo culture bahut jagah chalta hai, of, elder brothers' clothes worn by younger brother and elder sisters' clothes worn by younger sister. उनकी साइकिल छोटी हो गई तो आपको दे दी गई. ऐसा होता था, हमारे सामने भी करते थे. My elder brother's clothes given to me, his cycle given to me. I always say when he was getting married, I was very worried. It was thankfully better sense prevailed, but that whole thing was there. It was not because suddenly there was a lot of brotherly love, but it was because that there were days of shortage, the price would be high, you didn't have a choice. It went like that. All right? तुम बाद में भी हंस सकते हो. आपत्ति नहीं है. All right, let's see this. In the same thing, you please write, this led to high inflation. This led to high inflation in the economy, which became an important factor in reducing growth. You just write below that another point. Population growth was 2.3% per annum. Population growth was 2.3% per annum, which meant that per capita income growth was below 1.3%. It was around 1.3%, but slightly below that actually. And one more point you write in that. This is explaining why the growth was low. So you write, low growth rate in this time period, was due to successive droughts in 1965 and 1966, which resulted in recession of 1965-66, and BOP crisis of 1966. All right, we will keep the story till here today. We'll begin on BOP crisis tomorrow. I do one thing. All those of you who have doubts, see me right now. Like I don't want to keep your friends held up. तो वो लोग चले जाएं. जिनको भी doubts हैं, आप रुक सकते हो. मैं तो class के बाद रुकता ही हूँ. All right, so I'll be here. So those of you who have doubts, please wait. Others can always say bye-bye and go. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow then. No, 64, 65, 65, 66. No, 66, 67 was next time period. ये 66 रुक गया ना यहाँ. वो next time period हो जाएगा. All right? Yeah, it is Ford Foundation. You are right. Pranav, I hope you could connect. Just always refresh whenever you face this problem. No, it was only perfume for South India, Pritha, and not the large-scale industries in general. Only perfume for South India. किसकी? नहीं, वो करेंगे अलग से. वो कल करूंगा. जहां 56 to 66. अब 56 to 66 सर्विसेज एक साथ बात करेंगे. क्योंकि सर्विसेज में उतनी डेवलपमेंट नहीं थी. तो 56 to 66 कल एक बार में कंबाइन कर दूंगा उससे. Industry. Growth of closed economy could be a factor. Could be a factor. Why not? Like people who supply, say, nuts and bolts to car industry. Yes, yes. सेक्टर और बड़ा हो गया. हाँ नहीं, वैसे सेक्टर और बड़ी बात हो जाती है. जैसे ऑटोमोबाइल